What do you make of what the president did yesterday? He moved to restrict asylum claims by immigrants. How is that going to play? Obviously, it's going to play well in your state, but more nationally, I don't think it's going to be the same story.
Well, I'm actually not sure about that. I mean, it's federal law that he's relying on. It's the same federal law that he relied on with the travel ban and the Supreme Court upheld, which gives him the authority to restrict entry of any class of non-resident aliens that he views as detrimental to the country. So it's completely within his scope of authority, and unless Congress wants to change that, you know, he has the right to do it. And according to the Supreme Court, he can do it when he wants, how he wants, under what conditions he wants. He's in control of this whole issue.
Attorney General, as you look in terms of the next steps that the president would be able to take, where does that lead us? I mean, essentially, we're going to have a big budget battle over funding of bolstering the security along the U.S. Mexico border, the wall, for lack of a better term. But what else can the president do without Congress in the short term?
I mean, it's really difficult because obviously they hold the purse strings. So, I mean, he can do things like this where he can use federal law that he has the authority to use. And obviously he can use his messaging in the bully pulpit to discourage immigration. And he has with that authority, I think he can discourage immigration if he stands up on this particular issue, because people are going to be less likely to make the trek if they know they're not getting in.
I know, sir, you had a very important lawsuit on the DACA program, those dreamers, as they're often known. I think that's still working its way through the courts. But I think with the Democrats back in control of the House, we're going to hear a lot more talk about a possible compromise. Democrats give President Trump some money for his border wall. President Trump gives them a bit of a path to citizenship for dreamers. Right. Do you see any kind of a deal like that coming together? And how would you advise President Trump to handle that?
Look, he has already offered that kind of deal. He offered it early on. I think the Democrats wanted to keep it out there as a campaign issue, so they refused. But look, Congress is supposed to compromise. No one gets to decide what the law is by themselves. And there's no reason they shouldn't approach immigration, reform, the border security. All of these issues should be compromised on, and they should work with the president to get something done that benefits the American people.
Back to the president's announcement today for a second. Help viewers understand, you know, sort of seeking asylum is something I think you kind of see in the movies a lot. People show up at the embassy and they say, I want to be an American now, or I want protection from my country. What the president seems to be doing is making that obviously harder to do, and you have to go to a certain place to do it. Explain a little bit, what's the practical implication of that? Will this just mean a lot of folks will be denied essentially on the spot, or will there just be a shorter process? How do you see this working out?
Well, you know, obviously this came about because the asylum process has become a loophole for immigration, and it's allowed people to stay here for years, and we wait on hearings for years. And so I just think the president is trying to address, as these people come up, there may be some that do need asylum, and hopefully those get heard. But the reality is many of these people have been coached by lawyers, American lawyers often, to use the asylum process to get around the legal immigration process. So, you know, Congress is going to have to address this too. This is what we talked about earlier. We really do need reform in this country, and hopefully Congress and the president can agree on something that makes sense.
I want to stick with this idea of what Craig just said, which is it is something that folks hear about in the movies. I mean, the rhetoric around this issue, especially in the closing arguments of the midterm elections, the president's video ad, you've got a protest on both sides, you've got this caravan issue, you know, all of this. But I'm curious, Attorney General, what are you hearing from the business community in your state? In particular, we've seen the tech companies come out against the president's immigration policies, but what are you hearing from small businesses, from the oil sector, the energy sector in your state about what they would like to see done on this very volatile rhetorical issue?
Look, it's a mixed bag. So you've got, obviously, people here care about border security because it affects us directly. We have to deal with crime. We've dealt with potentially over 600,000 crimes in the last 6 years as recorded by our state police. But on the other hand, a lot of these businesses in the oil patch and otherwise, we do need workers. And so there needs to be a balance here. And I do think the president's willing to negotiate. I just hope that Congress can come together and work on something that makes sense.
I mean, you've said a couple times here that you think Congress needs to work something out. it does feel like both sides would rather have an issue than a solution. The president, as we said earlier, kind of made it to the White House in 2016 on immigration. I think it's fair to say he held the Senate majority based on the immigration issue, but he probably lost the House over it, at least in some of those districts. Why would the Democrats compromise? Why would the president compromise? What is a path to a compromise here that both sides might be able to look to and say, okay, we could live with that?
I think the president offered it up before the election, and that was the DACA compromise, working out a way for some of these people to stay in the country who are here illegally. And on the other hand, he wanted to deal with border security, whether that's more border agents, whether that's better technology, or whether that's a partial wall. He offered that up, and it seemed like it was soundly rejected by the Democrats. So hopefully, now that the election's over, maybe there'll be a little room to work.
And also, I think the types of Democrats that were elected, including in Texas, for example, immigration is not just a black and white issue in terms of the kinds of Democrats that were elected. And we saw that, particularly for centrist Democrats. Yes, they might have made some gains, picked up some seats in Texas, for example. But even Beto O'Rourke, who lost, of course, to Senator Ted Cruz, was speaking a bit more centrist on the issue of immigration than some of the other Democrats who were running across the country, no?
No, and I agree. I just hope that actually translates into action instead of just rhetoric, because obviously we've been sitting on this issue in Texas for decades, no one really doing anything about it, and the problem just keeps getting worse, and the rhetoric keeps getting worse, and yet we suffer the consequences here in Texas.